Shir Amalois Mabakim Kirasicha Adonai Adonai Shiva V'Koili Tienos Necho Kashuva Yislikar Tachad Nunai Inavoinai Stishmaya Adonai Miyamai Ki Mechas Licha Liman Tivarei Yisi Adonai Givesan Nasi Believe on Yachalti Nafshila Adonai Mishayim Lavoike Shayim Lavoike Yachel Yisroel El Adonai Kiyem Adonai Yachesed V'yavei Moifidos Yiftes Yisroel Mikol Aveinai Sam
Shama of every Yid, of every Maimin, but the Gewaldike Kedusha, difficult, maybe even impossible to describe the various Inyonim and Koiches. Here tonight, we're here to speak about the neshama of a Yid, Mr. Hofstetter, who I'll refer to as Nussan, Nutta, who our Yeshivah has a gewaldige closeness, and I'm being careful to say it in Lashon Hove, present tense, has a gewaldige closeness, not only had Lashon Avar, but has. A Yid, together with other Balabatim, Sheyichel Oichem Tevim, the gewaldige Koiches into the Yeshiva, and although, and I address myself to our Talmidim, although the Talmidim, the younger Talmidim Befrat, did not know, or maybe did not even have the opportunity to observe the gewaldige Kamelis that the Nussan Nutta put in our Yeshiva, but Mipia Shmu, you know about it. And as we explained to our Talmidim, our chayv of a Koros HaTev is limitless, is boundless. I heard from my Shver more than once, from Tali Frida Zechenda Brache, that the Iker Te'eles benefit for the Neshama of the Niftar is if we learn, and again I address myself to Talmidim, if we learn from the Niftar, we learn from him, and we're able to, in some degree, absorb into our own life, our own Mahalach Hachaim, Yisodes, which they gave for us in Avodas Hashem. We say in the Lashon of the Baruch and Shemoneh Esrei that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives Socher Tev l'chol habeitchin b'shimcha be'emes. So sehr interessante Loschen. There are Bochurim, Tehay, in the Rabbeinu Shalom people who are Tehay in the Rabbeinu Shalom. Or by the Loschen from the Chazal, the Bochurim b'shimcha be'emes. Different Bahalchim explaining what's meant b'shimcha be'emes. One derech referring to those who understand the Shem Hashem, or Shem is Hashem, so they are gathered from Shem be'emes. But I'm going to go more with the Goy, with the derech of the Goyin, Peirush HaSiddur, who explains there's different dargas in B'tachim. So about it, we're talking about Maminim, a man is Maimin the Rabbeinu Shalom, he's B'teich in the Rabbeinu Shalom. But the Pasuk is saying, the Lashon of the Pasuk, Lashon of the Chazal, in the Baruch Shemon Esrei, is saying that here we're talking about the darge of Bochurim b'shimcha be'emes, that the B'tachin is be'emes. It's also the chilek. How do we explain the difference between a darge of B'tachin and B'tachin be'emes? Going to Siddur says certain words, but I want to take out what I think is the Geya Linyaneinu. As we know, to some extent, other people know it more than we know. Nutta, Zechene Levrache, came from the gewaltige Golus of Churban Europe, was forced to leave, as many of our parents and grandparents, I should say, he was zeicha to leave, which did not happen to all our parents and grandparents. Not them, he came to America, Canada. What I call sometimes, describe them to me, my Talmidim as Golus Canada, Golus Toronto, because after all, it is a Golus. And there were many Bochurim, Baruch Hashem. Many of the Yidden, the Sheres HaPleita, of the elder generation, came, were still Baruch Hashem, had their bitachon and their emunah intact. Not everyone was zeicha to do that which the Nussan Nutta did. And those are the darge from Bochurim b'shimcha be'emes. So Bochurim be'emes means that the bitachon brought him about a b'siyat l'shamay gedela to do aveda and avoida in this Golus Canada, in our city of Toronto, and eventually his koyach spread to many parts of the world. Something which required, which apparently had a higher madrege of bitachon, the bitachon which led him to do be'emes. Be'emes, numerous Bais Chazal, refers to a davar shel kayama, something which is not temporary, but something which accomplishes permanence. And we can say, in our discussion over here, that he was zeicha. We see that he was zeicha to do, through his strong bitachon, to do something which Bamison brought him, take to the ilam ha'emes. The gewaltige koyches, which we were zeicha to see that Nussan Nutta had, did not come because he wanted to show people what he could do. It came because he was able to, Baruch Hashem, he believed, he had a gewaldige belief, a gewaldige bitachon in the koyach of Klal Yisrael, a gewaldige bitachon in the side of Shechina of Yisrael. As we know, the Gemara tells us in the Masechtas Megillah of Kovtas, Golu L'Bavel, Shechina Mohem. Even after we're forced the Golus of a Shechina Mohem. But a person has to have the darge of a bitachon be'emes to be able to margish that even as we go from one Golus to another Golus, The Shchini Moim, Golu Lebovel, and I'll add in my own Lashon, Golu Le Canada, Shchini Moim. And he was margish that the Shechina is being Mavakesh, that there's no way to be done. Tere and Moshe Chesed have to be rebuilt because the Shechina is awaiting it. And those men say Kayach, which I would like to call the Kayach of Bitachon Be'emes. It's known, a member of Pisgam that the Bisol Salanta used to say, quoted numerous places. The Yisroel used to say, I'll say it the way he said in Yiddish, and I'll translate in English to the best of my ability. Bisol Salanta gesagt, nicht nochtan, nicht optan, even nicht oiftan, no ton. So the English translation, for those who don't understand this Shloshim of Yiddish, a person shouldn't be nicht nochtan. He shouldn't do something because he wants to copycat someone else. He's someone else did it. He said it looks so good. The person is being applauded for what he did. I'll do it also. Nicht nochtan. No, that's not the derech of it. Then he said, nicht optan. Not that I'm going to do it and get it over with. Which also, sometimes a person says, I have a job to do. I was given a responsibility. I was told I should do kach l'kach, I should do this project for the community, that project. Let me get it behind me. So it's nicht optan. The third thing that Yisroel Salanta said, which maybe is the biggest chiddush, and he has to explain the most, nicht optan. Now, nicht optan literally means don't do it to accomplish something. Let's explain what it means. That means a person cannot and even should not say to himself, it's worthwhile doing this avodah because I will accomplish something. Nicht oifta. No tongue. Do. The say no tongue means a yid who's an oived avodas Hashem. He does it because he was told, he was directed, he had a mesiras, he had a belief. And the Bnei Hashem wants me to do. What the accomplishment will be, that's beyond the Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Chavis above says, Gemar of a mitzvah the hands of the Bnei Hashem. No tongue. Mr. Hofstetter, Hakaton, year after year after year. And in different years, not every year was as easy as a different year. I remember hearing from him numerous times. Hachaim, Hachaim. I discussed to observe him and to work with him, the Yeshiva, many years. I remember him saying to me this expression, maybe the family heard it too. At the end of the year, he used to say, "No, durchgestoppt dem Wagen noch a year." We managed to push through the wagon another year. We did. Und the Emerson, the gewaltige Kayach, which he demonstrated, I should say more, this is my point, that he taught us, that a person with the bitachon be'emes, he will do, and will do, and will do. And what the Gemara will be is the hands of the Rebbeinu Shalom. As we know, Mr. Hofstetter of Nutta was a person who was successful in his business endeavors. And he would describe to us, although that's not the point of my discussion tonight, because I want to teach Talmidim, but he would describe to us how in the first days of coming to Toronto was so difficult. Apparently it has been written up already, how difficult it was. So eventually, b'siyata d'shemaya, he was able to build himself up to be one of the most successful businessmen in the frumme Yiddish Welt, or to put it differently, he was one of the most successful frumme Yiddish businessmen in our Welt. In the Heilige Chayvus of Avos, in Shar Cheshbon nefesh, Cheshbon Chof, I think it is. He discusses what should a person's hashkafa be. To use the Lashon Teves of always im yesh lo imamen. aber hat Geld. Sagt der Heilige Chayves Alvaves, wenn Jeschli Moment, jeder, Shehu Etzloi K'moi B'Kodei. A mistake can happen to us. A person works hard, works honestly, we're discussing right now, and he comes to wealth, and a person can come to him and say, no, I am wealthy. I have become a different person, wealthy person. It's merely like a bikodim. Now, a bikodim means something which is given to you in trust to take care of. And then he has to take care of it, but he knows how to use it. He knows to use it for his chayvais. To Mishalom given over there. Another nekuda which I think comes from that darge of bitochim be'emes. Midafin tongue. The Rebbeinu Shem gave me koiches, and I think that's what Mr. Hofstetter's attitude, if I can understand it. It was given to me to use for chayvais, which the Kadosh Baruch Hu placed upon me. I want to add one more point. In Pasuk state, a wellspring that was dug out by Sorim. Sorim means men of great status. Karu on the Divyam. The Divyam literally means dug it out. The different Rosh's Chazal on this pasuk. I saw over here quoted from the Gaon, from the Vilna Gaon. And I want to say in brief a few points from the Vilna Gaon on this pasuk. Zokter Kalua Sorei Ha'am. Where's in the Sorei Ha'am? The Sorei Ha'am means the Sorei HaTeire V'loim Deho. The Sorei HaTeire, and those who learn the Teire, Chayfchim, Umamikim, Bilimbudim, Shal Teire. But Kalua and the divrei Ha'am. But the pasuk equates and brings in the divrei Ha'am. The divrei Ha'am of the Gaon, quoted from the Gaon. Most of the days are taken up. Masa Mata. Heimo Yikna Atire b'mechir kaspa. When the pasuk concludes, Kalu and the Divyam, Midbar Matana, Ki Eilu v'Eilu Chelkam B'Teira. They don't give Alik in the Kude. That the person, even though Ikra is B'Maso Matan, the learning is being done by the Sorim, but it's being done because of the Nishanoisom, the support. And we already explained what it means, the support of the person of B'Teich V'Emes. And I saw quoted over here on the sefer in front of me, an amazing quotation from Hachaim Volozhiner, the Talmud from the Goyim. And he explains in the Pasuk, he explains the Gemara, Dr. Psachim, Asidim tzadikim shechayu mesim. Asidim, as we come closer to Tchias HaMesim, the tzadikim will be given the ability, somehow, of bringing about the Tchias HaMesim. His masbir, his quotation of Hachaim Volozhiner. That means, Kol echad ve'echad, as me, shechzi koi b'chayim, each of the tzaddikim, that person that in his lifetime was machzik through his mammon, that tzaddik will bring tchias hamesim to that person. I would like to conclude. We want to give time for the other speakers here. As Bevison, we mitzad Yeshivah, the loim da Teire, and Baruch Hashem, the Teire in the Yeshiva has grown over the years. Baruch Hashem, myself, and weiter. I will conclude with the Nekudah, which I began with, that Teves. to Mr. Hofstetter the kind of Roshei, and Sheyichloi Loichem Teven, the other Balabatim who are Nasi Bail from the Yeshivah. We, the Talmidim, we have the ability, we have the responsibility through our Torah, through our Iyana Torah, through our being Mechekek, through our Limba Torah, to bring a Trias HaMeisim to the Neshama of Mr. Hofstetter, from Nussan, Sheyichyu, B'ez Hashem, and the Lichter Gan Eden, Tehay, Zichrei Bo.
Yeshiva Shlita, Roshei Yeshiva. Halaylam Dal, the Talmidim. Poischim B'choy L'chsanya Shel Torah. Ner Yisroel is synonymous with Mr. Sandy and Nutta Yitzchok ben Reb Hofstedter is a final bracha. Remember when I came, he was the yeshiva. Every meeting, everything, he was the yeshiva. Gemara brings down in brachas when they came to Yavna and the Hachaim all came together, Reb Eliezer, Reb Nechemya, Reb Yehuda, and they all started saying, Poisem Mechvay Achsanya. They were speaking about Achsanya. So Rashi brings down the Achsanya that the people in Yavna, when all the yeshivas started fleeing in Yavna, after Yochanan Zakkai was massacred there, so people took in everybody. So they all B'seach Mechvay Achsanya, people who were Machnas Oirach them. Yehuda, who was the Rosh Medabrim, Pasach B'chvoid Torah. He spoke about Chvoid Torah. So the Mefarshim will ask, they're right. We know we make a Mishu Berach even by benching for a Balbos, someone who helps you with someone's Machnas Oirach. Akaras HaToyim. How come Yehuda felt Paisum B'chvoid Torah? I think we can understand it, especially anyone who knows how involved Mr. Hofstetter's bracha was in the yeshiva. Someone who is machzik Torah, someone who makes sure there's Torah, someone who builds Torah. That's not achsanya shel Torah. That's Torah itself. The Torah brings down, and the same thing the Ramah brings down, the Shulchan Aruch also, that someone was machazik Torah, machzik Torah, ke'ilu hu loimet. All the Torah that's being learned here in Yisroel, all the years, Mr. Hofstetter is learning all that Torah. That's his Torah. It's not Paisach Mechvay Achsanya. Torah, that's a Torah alain. Someone who understands that you have to make sure the Torah is being learned. Someone who understands that you have to make sure the Torah is being learned in a way that doesn't share. That's not Achsanya Shel Torah. That's a Torah alain. Yisachar, and like the Torah brings down, as if you state in the Torah, Yisachar Zvulun, Yisachar Ba'elecha. So first says Zvulun. So the Zvulun is Yisachar B'Sesecha. Why? Because Yisachar Ba'elecha. Why is Zvulun happy? Because Yisachar that's his happiness. His simcha is that he sees the Torah bleeding, he sees the Torah flourishing, he sees Torah being learned. The hanoah that Mr. Sandy had when he came in and he saw learning, the biggest any time I met him, the hanoah that he had from all the Torah that's being learned, das nicht achsani shel Torah, das ist Torah allein. This is his Torah. It's his Torah. If you come in the history of Kal Yisrael, in the history of Toronto, one of the names that are being said, Nutta Yitzchok was the one who was the Mamidim HaTorah, Machzik Torah in over here, to make sure that Torah is being learned. The Gemara brings down a chulin that Kal Yisrael is like a geffen, pasuk in Tehillim, and just like the geffen has a shkoilos, it has the fruit, and it has the mesiras, it has the branches, and it has the alan, and it has the leaves. The same thing, we have the Talmid Chachamim, Kal Yisroel, the Shkoilos. Then you have the Zmoiros, the Balbatim who hold up, make sure they're standing, and the Alim that protect it. They're protected. So the Gemara brings down, and this is the saying that they say that the sculptor, the Shkoilos, the grapevines, the grapes should go be mispal al mamalta, should be mispal on the leaves. The lule malalta, because you won't have the leaves, the fruits wouldn't be able to stay. Without the leaves, the fruits will rot. Without people like Mr. Hofstetter, who made sure that Torah is being built and Torah was here when he started all these years to make sure and gave away his life for Torah, and made sure when he made a contract, part of every contract was to donate $20,000 to Yisroel. That was part of the deal. Part of to build a yeshiva, you need malchus. To build a yeshiva, to know how to run a yeshiva, you have to have malchus. You have to know how someone who knows how to run to make sure the yeshiva is running, to make sure that everything is ready for the yeshiva. Sure, Levi will be ready to Rosh Yeshiva, but the one who could, but the yeshiva in a way that there shouldn't be any daigas. The way Mr. Hofstetter made sure, it's one of the only yeshivas in the world that Rosh Yeshivas don't have to go schnorring for the yeshiva. He told the yeshiva that the Rosh Yeshivas should be able to give their whole time for learning, and to show that every yeshiva doesn't have that. Yeshivas, someone becomes a Rosh Koilel, Rosh Yeshiva means he has to go schnorr money. Mr. Hofstetter, together with the Shutta, with Hachaim, Mr. Blima Shlita, they stelled the yeshiva, there's a foundation as the yeshiva is a kind of stein. You need malchus to be able to know how to set up a yeshiva in a way that yeshiva should be able, everything that's done in the yeshiva and everything that goes on in the yeshiva, it shouldn't be the daiga of the yeshivas. That's the daiga of the Machzike Torah. Yehuda came to do it. And this is what you saw here in the yeshiva. You saw here in the yeshiva the way Mr. Hofstetter and all those others came and made sure that yeshiva has a foundation, has a way to be able to exist without going to Schnorr, without going to make that yeshivas have to become Schnorrers. And this was his vision. The vision was, we'll take care of all the mammonas. We'll take care of and make sure the yeshiva has a strong money foundation that it could be continued. The lulei, if you don't have the alalta, you don't have the leaves who make sure that the fruits grow properly. If you don't have that, then the fruits won't grow. Baruch Hashem, if you see there Yisroel growing, and you see Baruch Hashem sitting over here, Baruch Hashem, the Bochurim learning and steiking and Torah Yeshamayim. You know what that's from? That's because there's Achzika Torah who makes sure that the Torah, and this is if in the history of Klal Yisroel would be people like Mr. Hofstetter who understood what it means. The Gemara brings down that when a person comes to Lamayla, the Rebbe Shem asks him, "Nesasov and Nesato be'emunah, v'kavat eitim l'Torah." When you do it your business, did you do it ehrlich? And where you kavei eitim l'Torah. So Teves says the kasher in two places that l'chayra, the tchilas dina shel adam is al Torah. Why did the first ask for Nesasov and Nesato be'emunah? I think over here you could understand it. Anyone who knows that Mr. Hofstetter was such an ehrlich person in business. I spoke to people who worked with him. Anyone who did business with him had such decheretz for him. They wanted to do business with him. Anyone who did contracts and anything that was needed, they knew that you're dealing with a person, a mensch. You're dealing a person, his word is a word, and his menschlich, the way he treats you, the way he acts to you. I mean, I think that the children are benefiting from this now even, because he was a person. I saw that, in the book that Mordechai Mendelbaum wrote about Mr. Hofstetter, the whole Hofstetter mishpacha. So at the end, there's a letter from Dvorav Shalmeis, his Sava, what he writes there. he writes to his children. He writes, first of all, you should know when you go up and you're going to be judged in Shemayim, get judged later, no one's going to look at your material success. That's not what they're looking for. They look at the Torah and mitzvahs. That's what they want. They look, what Torah and mitzvahs you can take along. Means here's a person who could have been proud of his business acumen, been proud of what he did. But he wrote this was written 30 years ago. He wrote, that's not what I want. He's writing this to his children. And he's writing this with, you should know, it's not the material accomplishments that we worry. You want to take only with Torah and mitzvahs. This is the only thing that we take along. And then he writes afterwards, and always remember, you have to get along with people. He writes in the next paragraph, you have to get along with people and make sure you don't ruin your name and your reputation. Your name should be to be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim, that everyone who dealt with him, the Shem Shemayim, the way, the Ehrlichkeit and the Menschlichkeit and the way he took care of everything. And this is something we have to learn from him. To learn, this is Medav Zan HaMensch. I mean, Lo'olam Ye'odam, says the Kotzke, Koidem Dafim Zan HaMensch. And Nochdem Zem Gem Zan Yerushamayim, Gem Hum Yerushamayim. And the Gemara ends over there in a sort of battle Torah, and without Yerushamayim, you have nothing. Without Yerushamayim, you have nothing. Yeshem Hu Yitzroel, Yerushamayim that he had. And I think that's what carried him through the Mechama, that carried him through the youth. And the Yeshiva mentioned before Hayeshivah, in the Yeshiva that he learned in Kasho, the Yeshiva is the Chassan Sofer, every day before he started the Shir, he always started with Hayeshivah. Every day, 5 minutes before the Shir, and I remember when I learned the night of Yeshiva, that's how you start every time before the Shir, you start learning Hayeshivah. So the Yeshiva that he learned by had the Hayeshivah that Chassan Sofer used. And he showed the Talmidim, and started, and every time after 5 minutes, he started crying. Crying was the Hayeshivah. And it means, and Baruch Hashem, all those years he learned. Remember, Rav Kurzens, when Rachel used to tell me every day he had a shir with Mr. Hofstetter and others in the morning, he said, Ich darf euch ewig zurückreiten zum Shir for Mr. Hofstetter. He always, a person, the Torah, and the love that he had for Torah, and the care that he had for Torah, but together with that, the Ehrlichkeit, the Ish Yosher, a person who is the Ish Yosher. Where do you get all this from? This expansion, Be'er from Yitzchok, is a Grasha, Eir La'avos. To know, to remember, everything we get is from our Father. Everything I get, he writes there in that letter, everything we have is only because of my father, Reb Zev. Reb Zev, wherever he went, it was in Hungary, in Mauthausen, later in Canada, without the full conviction of doing mitzvahs and Torah without any compromise. Said, I think this is what stood up for our family. My father, he says, and everything I did is only because of him. To always remember, what's the Tata Geton? And everything we do is Ve'er La'avos. Everything we do is, remember, you come, what's the Tata? You do like the father did, then you're a different type of person. You stelle weg, the shtu, everything that's made. And that's what he saw it. His father, the tzedakah that his father gave me. If you read that in that sefer, the tzedakah that he gave him, he did. There's one story that he used to lend. Mr. Reb Zev used to let 200 pengos every week for some people, and they used to go and do business, and they came back and they sold their stuff, and they came back and paid 200 pengos. 2 people never came back. So he met them, and he asked them, why aren't you coming back? He said, we didn't have 200 pengos to pay you back. He said, you didn't have, that's why you didn't come. So here's 200 pengos. Don't worry about that. And this is how he lived the whole life, was to do chesed, and that's how Mr. Hofstetter lived his life. He lived his life of Torah and chesed. Torah, to make sure learning Torah, caring about Torah. And that's why Chazal teach us. If you leave children over, they go the same anhaga. The same anhaga is like he's still living. Baruch Hashem, it says that a person who is married Mois al kosher, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Moina. How do you know if a person is kosher? How do you know how kosher a person? How do you know if a person is kosher? Is kosher. So it's a beautiful part of the Satmar Rebbe Zechon Rebbe. Satmar Rebbe says that when Moshe Rabbeinu sent the Meraglim, he said, Hayeshivah eitz im oil. So Rashi says, go find out if there's a ish kosher. Find out if there's a kosher person there. So he said, how would they know if there's a kosher person there? How would you know if there's a kosher person? And Satmar Rebbe asked, and then after it says, L'kachtem prioritz. If you're saying eitz is going on ish kosher, what's, so he says, a mevil zayn of a mensch is a kosher mensch. Cooked of the kinder. He says, the biggest eitz of hatat and mammon is kinder. You look at the children, you can fool the whole world, you can't fool your children. If you want to see who Sandy was, look at his children, at every one of his children. His sons and daughter, and their sons-in-law and daughters-in-law, the whole family, the Einiklach. If you want to know who's Ish Kosher, you want to know who is Ish Kosher, you look, Baruch Hashem, the Torah that's being spread in the world through him, and everything that's being learned in in halacha and Torah and all in Yonim and the media Torah. That's because this is what Tabegeshlo. And he writes there also that all the projects that he did when he came, there's so many projects that he did. He says so happy because he wanted the children to see what we live for. We live for a mikveh, we live for a shul, we live for a yeshiva, we live for Torah. That's what we live for. That's what we come to this world for. So you can make money. That's not what you come to the world for. Money is only a medium. Money is not the purpose. That's not the tachlis. And that's what he wanted to teach. And every one of us who are talmidim in this yeshiva are his children. And his children, that's what we should always go away from him. To remember, the tachlis is not making money. The tachlis is Torah and mitzvahs. Tachlis is to take Torah and mitzvahs with us. The tachlis is to be a mensch, to be that all of us should learn. He should zichrei be netzach. We should. I'm sure that the zigul of the yeshiva, the chosim of the yeshiva, is through what he put into the yeshiva. Everyone should go away to be oisik b'Torah and kavei b'Torah and know that the tachlis in life is oichet to zayin ish yosher, a mensch, and mischus this will be zoichet. Schus yogan aleinu, the schus should be making on all of us and the yeshiva and the city and Klal Yisroel and Torah that he loved so much and mitzvahs and people that he loved so much should be making all of us be zoichet to see the gula b'meir b'yameinu.
Yeshivah Shlita, Abanam Chashuvim, Chami Mayri Shlita, the Bnei Mishpacha, Kol HaKadosh Hazeh. As we heard from the Rav Shlita, my father, the impression that his Rosh Yeshiva made on him, Shmuel Schwartz, was so strong, and he used to tell over and over again about the Chayvus Halvavais, and how he used to start the shir with the Chayvus Halvavais and open it up, and after a few minutes started crying, and then crying more and more until he couldn't continue anymore, and he said to the Bochurim, we have to continue with the shir. But interestingly enough, the sefer that he learned over and over and over again, the sefer which was his sefer for life, which he learned and he gave people, and he encouraged people to learn, was the Mesiras Yesharim. He learned Mesiras Yesharim over and over and over again, and that was his guide for his derech Hachaim. And it was always interesting to me, what was the pshat? And I really don't know. I can only speculate. So what I'm about to say is only my impression. But I'll try to explain it, prefacing it with a famous word from the Klugmann Rebbe, Zatzal. The Klugmann Rebbe, as is Yadua, lived through the Holocaust. One of the towering figures, lost a wife and 11 children in the Churban. and came and rebuilt his family, and rebuilt the Hasidus, and rebuilt Torah, and rebuilt hospitals. So he said the following part. It says by Noach that Chazal Yochel criticized Noach for planting the Kerem, Vayita Kerem, that Vayochel, and he became Chulin. He should have been Isaac and other things. Why was he Isaac in the Kerem and the Yayin? And he asked the Kasha is asked, that was what Yayin was created for. Lo nivra Yayin ella lenachim avelim. That was the creative purpose of Yain. Was there a greater Avelos? Was there ever a greater Avelos than after the Mabul, the entire world was destroyed? Was there ever a greater Churban, a greater Avelos than after the Mabul? So what was so terrible? He planted the Kerem, Vayita Kerem. Vayesh, that's what it was for. Was there a bigger Ovel than Noach? So he said the following word. He said, when there's a Petira, when Rahman al-Islam, there's a Petira. When there is Rahman al-Islam, there's a Tsar, there's an Avelos, then that's a time for Avelos. But when there's a Churban, when the world is destroyed, when there's a Churban, it's not time for Avelos, it's time to rebuild. In a similar vein, we just learned a couple of weeks ago, we learned in the parasha, and we just learned in the daf that when there was the encounter with Yosef and Binyamin, that Yosef, he was nafal on Salvore Binyamin, and Binyamin nafal on Salvorov. And Chazal teach us, what was this all about? They were crying. And Yosef was crying, for he saw in Nebuah for the Churban, the two Bais Medrash that were going to be destroyed, the Churban that would be in the Chelik of Binyamin. So he cried for the Churban of the Bais Medrash, the Bais Rishon and the Bais Sheni that were in the Chelik of Binyamin. And Binyamin cried for the Churban of Mishkan Shilai that was in the Chelik of Yosef. So the kasha is, as they saw in Nebuah, so Binyamin, why didn't he cry for the Churban that was in his Chelik? And why didn't Yosef cry for the Churban, the Mishkan Shila that was in his Chelik? Yosef cried for the Churban that was by Binyamin. Binyamin cried for the Churban that was by Yosef. Because when Rahman al-Islam, your brother, there's a Churban in his Chelik, you cry for your brother. But when Rahman al-Islam, there's a Churban in your Chelik, it's not time to cry, it's time to rebuild. And my father lived through the Churban. He lived through the Churban, and he came with that purpose. He came with a mission. He came to rebuild, not to look back, not to be miserable. Never heard him crying about the past, never feeling sorry for himself about the past, for the losses. To go forward, to build, he had a mission, he had a tafkid. He was a yid with a tafkid. And the Mesiras Yesharim was his sefer. Yisayid HaChasidus, B'sheirish HaAveda Tamima, his Barvius Amitz Eitz Halada Machay Vosa Ba'ilama, what is the chayva the person has in this world? What is his tafkid? What is his purpose, the blueprint for living with, fulfilling his chayva? And that's what he did. He had a tafkid, he had a tachlis. There was something to be accomplished. There was something to be done. Everybody has a tafkid. Everybody has a unique tafkid that's only his. But not everybody lives with the knowledge. Not everybody lives with the belief that they have a mission. Not everybody lives with the belief that they have a special tafkid. And not everyone is aware of what their tafkid is, but he will. And so he came and he rebuilt. He was a builder. He was a builder. He built subdivisions. He built office buildings, apartment buildings, but most of all, he built Torah. He built shuls, mikvayas, Meshav Zakanim, but mostly yeshivas. And most of all, this yeshiva. B'leiv nefesh, most of all, this yeshiva. And people thought, correctly, that he was exceptionally talented. He was bright, and he was energetic and ambitious. He was sharp, and all that is true, but that's only a very small part of the story. In this past week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's given the tafkid of saving Klal Yisrael. Mi anoichi, who am I, Moshe Rabbeinu says. His kovet peh, aral sasayim. How is he going to speak? Moshe Rabbeinu was the medaber of all time for Klal Yisrael, gave the Torah, his oral sasayim, misam peh le'ilim. The Rabbeinu Shalom says, who puts words in a person's mouth, a person that can't speak? Who puts words in his mouth? Hashem puts words in his mouth. Moshe Rabbeinu was a manhig. He was the ultimate manhig. He went to look at his brothers, Vayar b'siv loisam, and he saw their suffering, and he saw their pain, Vayachas a Mitzri, and he killed the Mitzri. He saw the pain, he felt the pain, and he did what he had to do, and he was meiser nefesh, mesiras nefesh, Vayachas a Mitzri. He was a manhig Klal Yisrael. The ultimate manhig. And my father was a manhig. He was a leader. It wasn't only a question of working hard. It wasn't only a question of being generous. When they came with my mother, Alav Sholem, they came here, they came penniless, they didn't know the language. It's hard to comprehend for this generation what that meant. They came from pre-war Europe, where there was no communications from a village, from a town, where there was no cars and no phones. They came to post-war North America. It was like being transported from a different era in history, transported from a different century and landing on somewhere where you know nothing about this culture, you can't speak the language. Even the Rabbonim that were in North America at the time were so different than the Rabbonim and the Rosh Yeshivas that they had experience and led them in pre-war Europe, in Hungary. It was a different world. And the natural netiya for someone who goes through so much suffering is suffered enough. And many did feel that way. It is godless. It's godless to go through such Gehenna and to be matal on yourself more suffering, more tsar, agos nefesh, yigia, and omo. That's godless. It was coming to a city in Canada where there was no yeshiva ketana, no yeshiva gedolah. There was no Beis Yaakov. Most of the people didn't even know what the word koilel meant. It's at a time when most of the Bochurim your age went to public school. And it was building Torah in that environment, when it was strange and foreign to most people, when Parnasa was very, very difficult. That's leadership. That's godless. And the Rabbeinu Shalom gives to manhigim, he gives them the kaiches, he gives them the skills and gives them the talents that they need to fulfill their tafkid. Moshe Rabbeinu, with the kvad peh, aral sasayim, he spoke to Klal Yisrael for eternity, for divrei. So my father had to do what he had to do. So when he was in the camps, his tafkid in the camps was to survive. Survival meant that if he was a cook, he could be in the kitchen. And if he was in the kitchen, he can find some discarded potato peels, and he can take the potato peels and he can survive and give it to the other people who are there, and they can survive as well. And his tafkid after the war, when he was in a DP camp, was to get a visa and come to America, to come to Canada. And there was a trade mission. They were looking for furriers at the time. That was an industry that they needed. They needed talented and innate people to come. So Rabbi Shalom gave him the skill to pass the test to become a furrier and to get a visa and to bring the family to Canada. And he had to make a living. So Rabbi Shalom gave him the skills to become a builder. And he became a builder in a way that would never been imagined, probably never even saw or dreamt of any of these buildings before in his youth. And he was one of the most respected builders in the city. And a person who couldn't speak English was speaking to bankers and politicians and to the wealthiest people in the country, and was respected from the most wealthy and the most powerful to the most simple. They admired him for his integrity, his honesty, his creativity, his energy. I remember once, many, many years ago, when I was young, I went to visit one of the construction sites. My father was building an apartment there. I went to one of the construction sites. I was very young at the time. It was a very difficult economic time. It was a time of a recession, and there was an excavator over there that was screaming and yelling that he's losing money on the job because the architect didn't draw the plans properly, and he's losing money, and then he was screaming and ranting and raving and yelling, and suddenly out of nowhere my father drove up, and he started explaining it to my father. My father looked at him sympathetically, and then he stopped in mid-sentence. And he said, "Mr. Hofstetter, it's an honor. It's a privilege and honor to do a job for you, to work for you. I would do a job for you anytime, even if it means losing money. It's a great privilege to work for you." And he had to build. He had to build Tehay. He had to build Tehay. And he had to build Tehay when he was just getting on his feet. Yirmiyahu Navi said, Rabbi Shalom appointed him to be a Navi al Yisroel. Yirmiyahu Navi said that the Rabbi Shalom, he says, Lo yuchal daber, ki nara noichi. Nara noichi, lo yuchal daber, I can't speak. How can I become a Navi? How can I become a Navi of Klal Yisrael? I'm a nar, I can't speak. The Rabbi Shalom says, Al Taimer Nara noichi. Don't say Nara noichi. Wherever I send you, you will go, and wherever I tell you to speak, you will speak. And he became one of the greatest Nevi'im. When the idea for Ner Yisrael, Yeshivah's Ner Yisrael came up, my father said, how can I start a yeshiva? I barely have parnasa. I can barely breathe. I'm working day and night. Day and night, 6 days a week. How can they even think about it? But the yeshiva fell on his shoulders. Al Taimer Nar Noichi. Don't say that you can't do it. Rabbi Shalom had other plans, so it fell on his shoulders. And he struggled with the yeshiva day and night, tried to put the budget together. I remember many sleepless nights that he had. I remember many times in the morning, I would see him, and it was clear that it was after a night, sleepless nights, how to make the budget work, how to put it together, how to bring in Rosh Yeshiva, how to bring in the koil, how to accommodate. And in the early days, it was very, the one yeshiva in Canada, how to accommodate the tzrachim, the needs of the whole country, the whole country, the Torahdik the community, from all sides, how to accommodate that within one yeshiva was an impossible task. It fell on his shoulders, and together, with the Hachaim, by Shlita, they worked tirelessly until this became a model a model of a yeshiva on how to innovate and raise money to build a yeshiva where yeshiva has a source of income, an independent source of income, can be somewhat self-sufficient. And even today, people are trying to emulate this, what two survivors came so many years ago. Two survivors came to Canada, not even knowing the language, to innovate new techniques in establishing fundraising, establishing yeshiva, that yeshiva could be self-sufficient. There were times when he felt he had no more koyach. How can he go on? He used to say, "Anoisim layoyach koyach." Rabbi Shalom gives koyach. My mother Shalom told me many times that, I thought that he would slow down a little bit. But as by Eliyahu Hanavi, he ran in the midbar, and he was running away. He had no food and nothing to eat and nothing to drink. And the Malach opened his eyes and he ate and drank, and then he rested. And then the Malach awoke him and said, "Kum achol." It's not time to rest. Kum achol. V'yelach mikoyach ha'achila ahi arboim yoim v'arboim laila. So he ate and got up and he ran with that koyach who died of 40 days and 40 nights. Suddenly there was a new burst of energy and there was new koyach. And there was new koyach to embark on new things and accomplish more. He had a tafkid. He had a mission. And at the end of his life, the last several years, when building was no longer the mission, when Baruch Hashem, the mesiras were on their feet, when Baruch Hashem, the community had grown and had matured, and Baruch Hashem, there were people to help, and there were people to help, and people bari cholos to help, and people with asagas to help, and Torah grew. And as he aged, the mission became somewhat different. He was surrounded by his family. Always the lave that was Nussan, always the lave that was concerned and caring. I remember even 2 weeks before his Btzror, I was in a rush. I ran into the house just to see how he was and how he was doing. He looked up, looking very frail, looked up from his wheelchair, and he said to me, "Why aren't you wearing a coat?" Always having concern and caring, but the fundamental preoccupation was Shevach Hoidot V'Ribbono Shalom. Shevach Hoidot V'Ribbono Shalom. Baruch Hashem, Zeicha. After all, Shevach Hoidot, to establish a family, to build Torah, there was never any bitterness. Sometimes we find by elderly people that they look back, and if they had sorrows and if they had difficulties, and there's sometimes bitterness, sometimes complaints about that you were never a complaint, never any kind of regret, bitterness. Always Shevach Hoidot V'Ribbono Shalom. And waiting for Mashiach. V'yitcho Hashem ki dilisani. Give thanks, Mimcha Hashem ki dilisani, v'lo yismach to'oivai li. Mimcha Hashem ki dilisani. Poshet Pshat is, Mimcha Hashem ki dilisani, that I give thanks to the Rabbeinu Shalom. I give thanks to the Rabbeinu Shalom that he saved me from these Tzrurahs. And he saved me from these Tzrurahs. He did not let my enemies overcome me and overpower me. Sasema says, Aramimcha Hashem ki dilisani. Dilisani is like from Midoila. So take a bucket, you lower it, you lower the bucket, you raise it up, and you lift up and you draw the water. In order to draw the water, you have to lower it down. Aramimcha Hashem ki dilisani. I give thanks to the Hashem because You raised me up. You raised me up. You lowered me down. I give thanks to Hashem because you lowered me down. I went through the stars. I went through the suffering that enabled me to give more praise and Shevach Doyle Ribono Shel Arim Chagig Lisani. He gave Shevach Doyle to Ribono Shel Olam for everything. For everything. There was no complaint. There was no bitterness. There was Shevach Doyle in the complete sense, waiting for Mashiach until his time came to be Nana Miziv Ashchina. For all of us, Tzrurah.
Bershus, Roshei and whole Yeshivah Rabbanim, my Shver family and community members. How fitting it is that this gathering, Lila Nishmas, our grandfather of Nussan, Yitzchok, Ben Reb Dovid Hofstedter, takes place in Yisroel. So many hundreds of its Talmidim, including a few of my sons, many of his grandsons and great-grandsons, have a karzotei for the Torah that is taught and practiced here. Mr. Sandy Hofstetter dedicated himself, so much of himself, to establish the yeshiva, to make it the success it is, full of esteemed rebbeim, chavrei kol and bochurim. From its founding, when attending yeshiva was not a given, the present day in the spacious and dignified campus, Yisroel, was part of his very being. We must appreciate in our days of plenty that the availability of kashrus, mesiras and chinuch and shuls didn't happen on their own. Dedicated men and women, often she'eris apleta, were nefesh to transplant the mesiras and to build those mesiras, Torah v'chesed. All that we take for granted, the choices we have in chinuch, shuls and community service like mikvahs, are there because of the initial work of some incredible people, such as Mr. Hofstetter. Lest we minimize the importance of this groundwork, let us recall how much the Torah values the critical need of such founders. As was mentioned before, Yehuda Shalach Lefana, Rashi explains, Bais Talmud. Establishing yeshiva is our method of survival. Similarly, the Rebbeinu Shalom sent the Cherish and the Maskir ahead prior to the Yidden going to Bavel to establish the framework of Yiddishkeit. Therefore, in Golas Bavel, there was Sifrei Tanakh written. Mishnayos and Gemara we learned today are replete with Aramaic words indicating the success of Torah learning in that Golas. However, as is well known, for more than 200 years, waves of Shomrei Torah families and tremendous Talmidei Chachamim came from the old country and settled in many Northern American cities, but were not granted the ability to establish yeshivas. Unfortunately, the fallout of this was mass assimilation. Their children lost in the melting pot of a treif in Medina. Then, closer to our times, Hashem allowed great people to put down Jewish roots in the US and Canada to build yeshivas and shuls, and thereby the realization of a sustainable, thriving Yiddishkeit. After all that comes after was built on what those founders worked so hard to create. Our grandfather was one of those founders. Yes, he was gebenched with special talents, a wonderful upbringing, trained by his parents and his Rebbe in Chesed and Torah, and later recognized as a doer and a Nishmas Liach by the Torahdik community. Yet, it was because of his determination, his yashmus and bitachon, that he was granted the opportunity by the Rebbeinu Shalom to be a founder and to have the schuyas of all that followed. He had a sense of mission, an eye to the future, the emunah of Am Yisrael Chai, that somehow the internal message of Torah will survive and triumph. Grandpa believed that he benefited more from Yisroel than he gave to it. He was advised that the connection to Yeshivah would shape his own family and bring them attachment to Torah. He raised his children and their families, to not just give, but to be personally involved. They carry on their legacy because they have seen the truth of that way of life. On a personal level, when I married his oldest granddaughter, I had the bracha and pleasure of being welcomed into a family led by Mr. Hofstetter. As a Reish Mishpacha, he was a force, unifying, caring, guiding, supporting, giving musar, promoting accomplishments, and appreciating each child and grandchild for who he or she was, chiding, encouraging, and complimenting each one accordingly, with the kibbutz and the stories of his life experiences. The happiness and appreciation he felt was palpable, to be zeicha to the nachas after the destruction and displacement that he had experienced. He accepted the Rebbe Shem's decrees in tough times. Amazingly, despite what he endured, he was a positive person. He constantly verbalized the wonder he felt and the thanks he gave to the Rebbe Shalom for his success in business and in life, but above all, to have raised together with Grandma Allah Shalom such a firm family. He earned a reputation for stellar honesty in business, making sure that every side wins. A handshake deal was respected. He taught the erlich from the honest, work hard, so that you shouldn't be tempted into something disreputable. He said, Hashem Tayyib in business, 50 years in the making can be lost in 5 minutes. His erlich business reputation still benefits his family today. He believed that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives that slach in business and put money in the pushka of Rebbe Balanes before each deal. Known for his quick mind, he was pragmatic, tachlis oriented, living a life of purpose, not wasting time. Azeda left a written tzavah, moral instructions to his children and grandchildren to be opened after his b'tira, things that are not found in the book. He started writing 30 years ago and added to it often. This tzavah is packed with gems of wisdom and outstanding mussar sefer, deeply reflective of how he lived and how great he was. He modestly wrote, "There is nothing new here that you don't know yet, but I believe it will help my neshama when I'm standing in heavenly judgment that these are the messages I leave. I have permission to share the takeaways, some of the takeaways of his moral tzavah. I'm condensing them into 10 headings and points, and then we'll quote his actual words briefly, slightly adjusted for grammar, brevity, and continuity. Takeaway number 1, accept all that the Rebbeinu Shalom does with emunah. In his words, there's a quote, after the Holocaust, we all had questions. How could Hashem allow 6 million Yidden to be killed? After a few months, my father Zal, who was a very religious man, told us, children, we cannot ask questions. Hashem Yisbarach is the Almighty. We have to go in our own ways, be religious, believe in Hashem, and He will help us. So that's what he did. And he helped us establish a beautiful family, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, build a business, yeshiva, shuls, mikvayis, and doing chesed. Number 2, live with Eilam Haba as a reality. In his words, I firmly believe in Eilam Haba. We will not take with us money or bank accounts. Income from investments will not help us. Only mitzvahs and maasim tovim that we accumulate in this world will help us over there. Number 3, study Musar. In his words, you are all aware that I am a big chassid of Moshe Klugmann Grandson. And I believe it's very important that we have a daily share of Mesilas Yesharim. I urge you to learn it daily for 10 to 15 minutes. You will always discover new things that you have not noticed before. Number 4, if you have success in life, don't take credit for it. In his words in 2004, what happened in Canada in the last few years was a lesson for all of us. We can't think that we are very clever and can make money easily. We cannot leave Hashem Yisbarach out of the cheshbon. We have to give Shevach V'Yadayah that we survived the recession. We also have to learn a lesson for the future. Everything is in Hashem's hands. He controls and directs the world, and we have to live the derech HaTorah. Number 5, live within your means. In his words, control your lifestyle. The large wedding parties are not necessary. It also spoils the thinking of future generations. It is not important to wear clothing with the latest style. They should be clean and balabatish. Very seldom do I throw away clothes, not because I am stingy. I give away tzedakah very easily. But all my life, I was against spending money unnecessarily for food and clothing. I could afford to travel first class, but I never had. I feel guilty to spend money that way for comfort. Much better spent on tzedakah v'chesed. Number six, allow your children to be each their own person. Be proud of them and encourage them to stay together. In his words, to my dear children, live in harmony with each other. Your strength is that you stay together. Each of you has different special qualities. Baruch Hashem, you're all wonderful people. Jewish parents could not wish any better. Be patient with each other. Number seven, you are never too old to grow and become a better person. In his words, at age 68, about a midah that he was working on. It is not easy, but if you try, you will be matzliach. I am still working on myself daily, and when I succeed to better myself in any direction, it really gives me pleasure. He also wrote, it's okay if your children are more religious than you are. Number 8, do chesed. It can lead to amazing results. It's well known that Mr. Mayerfeld was the one who convinced Mr. Hofstetter to help start Yisroel and all the good that followed. But do you know why he agreed to that request of Mr. Lubavik? It all started with the chesed. Here in Mr. Hofstetter's words, my father and his wife finally got permission to enter Canada. They arrived with few dollars. The Canadian Jewish Congress was lending $300 without interest to Jews from the DP camps to be paid back $5 a week. My father required 2 guarantors. Nobody wanted to guarantee such a note. You have to understand that $300 was a lot of money and people were guarded. I wanted to help my father with the loan application, but no one would hear of it. I davened with Mario Lubavik, so I asked him. He told me he needed to think about it and would let me know. He then told me, I can't refuse you. You are trying to help your father. I will sign the note, but I can't have anybody find out about it. Meet me on the corner of Markham and Palmerston Streets at 3 p.m. Sunday and bring the note and I will sign it. Once I had a signature, I was able to find another co-signer. The rest, including Yisroel, is history based on the chesed. Number 9, be personally connected to Yeshivah. In his words, this is a lesson I want to give you. Because I was connected to the Yeshivah and the Rebbeim and helped me raise my children in a religious way, this is the reason we accomplished so much, because we were connected to religious roots. And finally, number 10, live a pure, purposeful life such that you don't have to fear death. That should encourage you to happily accomplish what is truly valuable. In his words 30 years ago, believe me, I am not at all worried about death. I am 66 years old, and whenever my time will come to leave this world, I will go happily. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu will punish me with sickness and I have to suffer, I will try to take it with satisfaction. I know that it will not be easy, but I will try to take it b'ahava. I am satisfied that after all the suffering, HaKadosh Baruch Hu granted us a good life to establish generations for derech Torah. We always had in mind to prepare ourselves with plenty of good deeds in order to take with us when the time comes to be presented to the heavenly court. Those were his words. That's how he lived. Yehi Zifri Baruch.
Tonight's Maimad Rabbi Say. B'shas Petiras Shalodam. In the Bryce and Perek Vav is B'shas petirosei shel adam, ein melavin loy. A person is not accompanied, loy kesef, loy zav, not his silver, not his gold. El Torah masim toivim. Just his Torah and his masim toivim. This is a Tanner. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is being mechadish. The chiddush, the Tanner, my kamash malon. Kamash malon, that the only currency that's transferable, that we can transfer lamala, is Torah masim toivim. Frek the Chayodam, what's the hava amina? What was the hava amina? The kesef and zav could be transferable. Need a tana to be mechadish that kesef and zav doesn't accompany a person lamala. Can make bank transfers today from one end of the world to the other, but we can't make a bank transfer out of this world. Was it a hava amina? What is the tana even bavarning here? Zok the Chayodam, what Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was trying to say, he was coming to make the point, and he was coming to say what the emes is. Even in Olam Hazeh, not only in Olam Haba. It says, what's the Maila in Olam Hazeh? You can tell from Bishas P'tirosei Shel Adam. When a person is nifter, and by the Levaya, this is a Mishabeach. By the Levaya, a person is being praised, he's being lauded for his accomplishments. What's he being praised about? Kesef, Zav, H&R developments. Torah masim toivim. Every person who was listening tonight heard about Torah masim toivim. Building Torah. As was said, literally every brick here. Every brick was built by Mr. Hofstetter, Zichreinu Levracha, and L'Avda ben Chaim L'Chaim is Bochurim. Our president, Mr. Bleeman, soll sein gesund Leurach Yom Tovim. Literally, every shir, every shmuz, every dvar Torah, every toisvis, every musser, every dvar musser, every bacher who steigs is literally bis chusai mamish. And the masim toivim. How many people he helped throughout his life? What was spoken about tonight? The koyach from bitochen, the koyach from seeing a kloret tafkid, from being focused and never losing that focus. The koyach hamalchus from bayin Torah. The koyach to be focused, to constantly. From the time I knew him, he was constantly focused. As Reb Chol mentioned on Olam Haba. That's all that's spoken about. That's all that's mentioned. Torah masim toivim. Zok the Chayodam, what Reb Yossi ben Kisma was saying was not only in schar and Olam Haba. You're only going to get schar for Torah masim toivim. What's praised even in Olam Hazeh? What really counts? Maybe in the board meetings, maybe in the business, in the boardrooms of the business room of the business world, Ken Zayin, H&R developments was praised. But here all that matters is Torah masim toivim. And b'shas p'tirosei shel adam, that's when the emes comes out. And Rabbi say tonight, it's takaroi and fitting that this zikorin is for Mr. Hofstetter here. Chazal, Mishnah says in Shlita that Yosef HaTzadik, Bibald, he was the most exalted of all of his brothers. He was the Mishnah Lamelech in Mitzrayim, and he was Nisasik, Bichfoidoi of Atzmai, Bikfuras, Yaakov Avinu. Therefore, he was Zoicha, Mida Keneged Mida. That Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayikach Moshe Atzmai Yesevim, Moshe Rabbeinu was misasik with his Kfurim. And Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu was misasik with Yosef's Kfurim, therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bichvoidoi of Atzmai. was misasik with Moshe Rabbeinu's Kfurim. Mr. Hofstetter was misasik. He was misasik with the yeshiva his entire life. His asik was the yeshiva. He identified with the yeshiva. He didn't only support the yeshiva. He didn't only give money to the yeshiva. He didn't only take care of problems for the yeshiva. He identified with the yeshiva. He personified many ways in the shtat. He personified Yisroel. When people had tightness on the yeshiva, they had tightness on him. And when people had nachas in the yeshiva, he took that as a personal accomplishment and a personal nachas. And he cared about the yeshiva yomim v'layla. He carried the yeshiva. He lived the yeshiva. Vayichi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim 17 shana. Yerushalmi state in Medrash that Rabbeinu HaKadosh said on himself, Vayichi Yehuda b'tzipoi, v'chaya Yehuda b'tzipoi 17 shana. Yaakov Avinu was preparing Klal Yisroel for the Golus Mitzrayim, and the Rabbeinu Shalom gave him the chiyus, Vayichi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim 17 shana. And Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi was preparing Klal Yisroel for the Shver Tkufis, the Tkufis that were coming up, the Hasimas Yemei HaMishta, there was a Chashchus, there was Yord Aloilam. And Vayichi Yehuda b'tzipori, Zok the Meshech Chochmeh, that some people aren't really alive. They go through the motions, but they're not really living. Some people are Vayichi. He says, that's also madrega. To be alive, to be real. Vayichi. Some people live for themselves. Some people live for their bnei bayis, for their mishpacha. That's also madrega. It's a madrega to be making mazam mishpacha mefuoris. It's a madrega. Mr. Hofstetter was intensely proud of his mishpacha. On the one hand, he was nispoil, taking a look back. Immigrants coming to a land devoid of Torah, where modernity and success was synonymous with leaving Torah behind, or at least watering it down and diluting it till it's almost unrecognizable. And he went bitumai and built a mishpacha, and he didn't know at the time what's going to be. And beyond his wildest expectations, he would tell me the pride he had in each and every one of his children and grandchildren. And that these stylus, that it was possible in such a midbar shmama to end up with such a mishpacha mufuara. That was his chiyus. We spoke about it. And then there are those who are vayichi, those who live for a greater purpose, more than just themselves and more than just their mishpacha. Yaakov Avinu, the entire Klal Yisroel was spread out Mitzrayim, and that they were about to start Shiva Mitzrayim. Vayichi Yaakov. Yaakov invested his chiyus in Eretz Mitzrayim. He invested his chiyus to prepare Klal Yisroel for the Galus. He was mashpia and Klal Yisroel for that Galus. Vayichi Rebbe, Zakta Meshech Chochmah Ban Vasanusai, Rebbe limited his dibur to Tzipori, that he lived for Tzipori, but really Rebbe lived for Klal Yisrael. Vayichi Mr. Hofstetter. Vayichi Mr. Hofstetter, perhaps for Toronto, but one thing I can certainly say, he lived near Yisrael. The Yisrael was an integral part of his life. It wasn't something he did agav. He lived near Yisrael. Tonight will be Mekatzer. I'm going to share with the Olam Tanad Velio, how the Tanad Velio learns up a parsha in Yeshaya. Yeshaya Navi, and we learned this in Yom Kippur, Yeshaya Navi said, call out. Yeshaya Navi was told by the Rebbeinu Shalom, call out with your throat. State loudly and fearlessly, al tachsek, don't hold back. Harein kashofer koilecho, lift up your voice like a shofar. And the Navi continues, don't be noyig like Klal Yisroel was noyig, just with chitzonius, but the pnimius and the Bein Adam l'chaveiroi was broken. But on the other hand, what you should be doing is sharing your bread, breaking your bread with someone who's roiv, someone who's hungry. You should bring them in, welcome them into your house. If you see someone unclothed, you should cloak him, you should cover him. The Hachaim brings the Tanna Vilio and Abbas Chesed. Zok the Tanna Vilio, Keitzat. How should you do it? Tell him. You give him some money, you send them to the, or you give him some money, or you give them clothes themselves, and you cloak him, you clothe him. Keitzat. Zok the Tanna Vilio. This is speaking about someone that's Orei min HaTorah. Because you don't have someone who's unclothed, like as someone who doesn't have Torah. What was the kasha of the Tanna Vilio? Keitzad. Where did the Tanna Vilio get to learn that this is referring to an Orei min HaTorah? Keep shutai. Kisira Orei v'chisisai. You see someone who's unclothed, you give him clothing, or you give him money to buy the clothes. The Tanna Vilio is being medayik here. What's the pasuk saying? What's the Navi saying? Kisire oraim b'chisisa. When you see him and you cloak him and you cover him up. B'chisisa oraim. You should cover up someone who doesn't have clothes. You should cover him up. It's obvious. You have to see. You have to get better vision and see. Kisira, when you see someone. So in the Poship Shat, there are many people who have a disconnect. They see, but they don't see. Mr. Hofstetter had sight. Mr. Hofstetter had insight. He saw what other people didn't see. That's the Poship Shat. Kisira Arim V'chisisa. Sometimes a person can look clothed and he's really unclothed. Sometimes he's missing things, he's missing basics. And it's not obvious. This koyach hariyah was a koyach that Mr. Hofstetter excelled at. I mentioned this on a different occasion, that when I first moved up here, I come from Cleveland. And there was a Yid in Cleveland who was once parted on Holle in Yisroel. And he told me, I knew nothing, I didn't know Mr. Hofstetter, I didn't know anything. He told me, in Yisroel, there's a lot going on. He says, but he used to sit at the meetings, he was parted on Holle, he used to sit at the meetings. He says, there's one man there that's going to sit like this and listen to everyone else say. And at the end, in one or two sentences, sum up everything, extract any dvar chochma that was said, and implement it, and that's the way it's going to be. He had the koyach to cut through all the noise, and go right to the nakuda. He had a koyach hariyah to see clearly. That's in Pashut Pshat. But the Tanna Vilio wasn't satisfied with this Pshat. The Tanna Vilio says is learning up. This is speaking about a fully clothed person. If there's a challenge of understanding and seeing how this person is truly unclothed, it must be that he's wearing very fine begodim. It must be that he's really well clothed. So what is his aronkite? In what way is he not clothed? In what way is he missing clothing? Sagt Tony Leo, because he's missing the most important thing. That's Oraim, Elamisha Ein by Torah mitzvahs. The greste Orimkeit, the greatest destitution and the greatest nakedness is someone that doesn't have Torah mitzvahs. Kisira armi kitzise keitzad elimarisa adam shein by divrei Torah hachnisei leveisecha v'lamdeyu and teach him. The Hachaim tells too. This is ashrei maskil dol, to have the insight to be able to understand what the dal is really missing. And the Hachaim is mamshich. And who had been ashrei maskil dol. When you see a person that's ein loy koyach lahachsik bonav l'Torah, he doesn't have a way of bringing his children to Beis HaSefer to learn Torah. What happens is, chas v'shalom, his bonav will end up holchim u'mizdaldelim v'nisharim amei haaretz gemurim. They're chas v'shalom going to end up amei haaretz gemurim. V'yesh mehem sheyotzin al yedei ze l'tarbus roa gam kein. They'll go off the derech. There won't be a vestige of Yiddishkeit left. Okay, mitzvah rabba lahaskil oidoisam l'sitam lebeis hasefer. Kisira oraim. There was a matziv. The Klal Yisroel was oraim. Generally, the population, the Hamayinam and Klal Yisroel at the time, were breathing a sigh of relief. They finally escaped the persecution across the ocean. And they had relative complacency, relative calm. Here in Canada, here in North America. And they were okay. They looked back to Europe. Many people didn't have education, Yiddish education. They didn't have a Rebbe past 14. Many people ended up from ehrliche Yidden, von der Stub and von der Stadt. And that was fine. They didn't realize that there was about to be a Churban Naira. That here in America, if there wasn't Torah past 14 years old, if there wasn't Limud Torah past 14 years old, what the Chofetz Chaim says, there would have been Mizdaldelim. They would have they would remain Nishtar Amei Haaretz, but they would leave Torah Chas v'Shalom. They would leave. They wouldn't be Shemri Torah Mitzvahs. Kisira Araim. It was a necessity for a Re'iyah, Sira Aram, to realize the Aram Shah, to realize how Aram we were, and to cloak that, and to live with that. Zok the Navi. The schar for that, this is the schar of Neis Netztake. The schar for that is Vayisok Yigan Rove Chomoitzamayim Asher Lechazvu Meimav. You'll be like an irrigated garden, like a wellspring of water that has a sure supply, like a wellspring of water that has a sure supply that doesn't stop. That's referring to the koyach to be nice peiris. As was mentioned, Mr. Hofstetter Zichron Vracha would always say that his schus to taka raise such a family, this pella, this schus to raise a family, was because of his involvement with the yeshiva, because of his involvement with Torah. Through involvement with Torah, you heard this from Mr. Lubavik Zichron Vracha, through involvement with Torah, it'll be good for you, it'll be good for your children. Kisira aram b'chisisai. The pasuk says, "Umi b'tzorcha lo tisalam," not to be misalam b'tzorcha. Zokte Tanei V'yu weiter. What does it mean, b'tzorcha al tisalam? If you have Talmidei Chachamim in your shchuna, Zokte Tanei V'yu, if you have Talmidei Chachamim in your shchuna, V'yodei boy shekayre l'shem shamayim v'shoyne l'shem shamayim v'zonoi u'mechalkaloi u'mefarnesoi nimtze mekayim oisei talmid bez ishtoi bez bona bez kol asher loi. Mr. Hofstetter looked at it as a schus. He was able to be mefarnes talmidei chachamim. He was able to be mefarnes the rabbanim of the yeshiva. The Tanit Velio is learning that goes into mi btzorcha al tisalim. The Mefarshim explain mi btzorcha because Talmud Chacham is hakol kreva. Mr. Hofstetter felt that way. He felt that way about that Holas Hayeshivah. I could say personally, Mr. Hofstetter had an ava. We felt the ava. Remember the first time I walked into his office? I was a very young man. And I was only coming at that time temporarily. About 30-something years later, but I was only here temporarily. And I was never in a corporate office. And I never spoke to a CEO. And my Shivah Reb Gavril told me to go down. I went down. And the first thing I was nisrashim was instead of speaking to me from behind his desk, he went to the small table and sat down as equals. Instead of speaking from the power position, the big CEO, he sat down as equals. And then as he spoke, he's being mechabed me. It was almost my father's age. And he's being mechabed a man who didn't deserve the cover. But that was his chinuch. That was the chinuch, the murdike chinuch of the Chasim Sofer, Ungarische Judentum. A covet, the covet that Mr. Hofstetter had for Rabbonim, the covet for Rav Kerzner Zichron Bracha, the covet for all the Rabbonim in the Yeshiva and the Roshei Yeshiva, the Derech Eretz, the way to handle, the way to deal with us. Anything in the yeshiva b'chlal, the smallest thing that went on was dealt with kimad on a daily oifen, in a personal manner. Mi b'sorcha, we were his basar. We were mamish his basar. Mi b'sorcha al tisalom. Mr. Hofstetter looked at it as ora noise as noisav. B'schus is asik with the yeshiva. Therefore, he was matzliach beikar with the mishpacha, but who had been matzliach in business too? But the pasuk for Zois epis anders also. Uvonu mimcha charvais olam. We built up the charvais olam. The charvais olam. Mr. Hofstetter came to a Welt that was Charvais Olam, and he was Matzliach, the bracha for a nice stocke, for someone who realized the Orim Shaft, the Orim Bli Torah. Kisira Orim V'chisisai, Umivsaruch Al Tisalom, is Uvanu Mimcha Charvais Olam. The ability to be Matzliach in building up Charvais Olam. Moistei dor v'dor, building up moistei dor v'dor. The moistis, the Mefarshim say, even the moistis that were charev from past dairis. Father Mefarshim learn moistei dor v'dor, moistis that will last dor v'dor. Baruch Hashem der Yisroel. Mr. Hofstetter's now Yisroel is already Baruch Hashem dor v'dor v'dor. Azat Tzlochem. And this is the bracha for this hatzlacha is because kisira orayin v'kisisoi. There's a siyata d'ishmaya. Reb Chaim Shulevitz sagt a murdike chiddush. Everyone knows that Chosen, Mishael Digdula, are meichlan leikol avaynois. And we learned this from Esav. Esav married Machlas. Frekt Chaim Shulevitz, we know that for Mechilas Avonis, even in Yom Kippur, which Yom Kippur is doch a moyer dike Mechilas Avonis. Yom Kippur is doch But Yom Kippur b'loy tshuva is ein miskaper loy. Even Yom Kippur needs tshuva. Esav and Mochlas bas Yishmael. Esav and Mochlas were moichlin lahen avoynei. What type of tshuva did they do? Shem Zalman held they did tshuva. Okay. But Reb Shulevitz took on, they didn't do tshuva. And without tshuva was moichlin lahen avoynei. Why were they zoicha to a greater mechila? A greater, in one aspect, a greater madrega of mechila than Yom Kippur itself. Sagt Hachaim, because when someone gets married, he takes achrayas for her, and she takes achrayas for him. When someone's oila ligdula, he takes achrayas for the klal. A mekabel achrayas receives the siyata dishmaya. And therefore, we have to erase all the impediments of the past. And we have to give him the opportunity and the koyach to firois his kabbalah achrayas. It's a moyerdike chiddush. That by being mekabel achrayas, there's a siyata dishmaya to be able to firois that achrayas. If a person if a person takes responsibility, the Rabbeinu Shalom will give him the kelim and the tools to be successful in that responsibility. And without him being mekabel achrayas, that siyata d'shmaya wouldn't have existed. Esav and Mochlas were mekabel achrayas to each other. Esav was going to take care of Mochlas, and Mochlas was going to take care of Esav. And Oila Ligdula, even if he doesn't do tshuva, he's being mekabel achrayas. There's a siyata d'shmaya. Someone was nemtzach uter and takes a responsibility on himself. He's matzliach. Uvanu mimcha charvei soila. If you see Arim v'chisisoi, if you see that there's an Arim shaft, and you fill that void, Uvanu mimcha, that siyata d'shmaya gives you a koyach. Uvanu mimcha charvei soilam, moistei dar v'dar. Because Mr. Hofstetter, Zichroinu Levracha, and Lahavdil ben Chaim Lechayim, his Shutif is Mechut Mr. Bleeman. They were Aron Noisei Noisav. Because of that, the Aron, the Yeshivah was Matzliach, that gave a Siyata Dishmaya to be Matzliach. Moistei Darvada. I want to be Messiah. With Mr. Hofstetter's Zichroinu Levracha own words, although I may not quote the exact words. I believe it was 1995, the 50th anniversary. Mr. Hofstetter spoke. The hall, banquet, and he made an impassioned plea. And I learned many things from Mr. Hofstetter. Chochmas Hachaim, how to deal with the Tzrurah. Many gewaldige insights. But this is perhaps first and foremost. He said, I'm making an appeal. He said at the banquet, I'm making an appeal. And in case many of you aren't familiar with what an appeal is, an appeal used to be synonymous with take out your checkbooks. Take out your checkbooks and write. I'm making an appeal, but the appeal is not for money. I'm making an appeal, he says, because this door already has its moistness, everything is set up, and people are just living through it. So I'm making an appeal. Get involved. Don't just be part of the community. Get involved. Get involved with the Moshe Torah. Take achrayas. Take a responsibility. It'll be good for you. Like we said, Ora Nisi is Nisa. But take the achrayus because Klal Yisrael needs it. Klal Yisrael needs the siyata d'shmaya. The siyata d'shmaya of people who have the insight. The siyata d'shmaya of people who see a need and take responsibility. And Rabbi Isai, I'm speaking to everyone, including the Bochurim. Take responsibility. Kisira Oraim. You see somebody else, you see a chaver who's struggling. Whether he's struggling with understanding a Teves, whether he's struggling socially, whether he's struggling in Yerushalayim. Kisira Oraim v'chisisai. Open up your eyes. See what's in front of you. See that there are people that are needy and take a responsibility. Nem zachunter. Don't just live in your own cocoon. This is Mr. Hofstetter's appeal. This is Mr. Hofstetter's bikush. This is what he stood for and lived his life for. He took responsibility, he took charge, he took an achrayus. And because of that achrayus, he had siyata d'shmaya. And his meiser was matzliach. Live life that way. Get involved. Take a responsibility. And Be'ez Hashem, this should be a schus for us that we learn this midah. And a schus from Mr. Hofstetter, our hakaras hatoiv, is to pay back as many schusim as we can for all that he did, and he carried the yeshiva throughout the years. Tia Nishmas Tzrurah Btzror.